The Russian Federation's Ministry of Agriculture invited the World Bank to send a mission to evaluate the potential of a World Bank loan for Russian higher education to assist them in making the transition to a new agriculture, one based on a free market economy. The World Bank's mission was led by Dr. Jit Srivastava, who was a senior agriculturalist with the World Bank stationed in Washington, D.C. He was joined by Dr. Jock Anderson, a principal economist in the Agriculture and Natural Resources Department of the World Bank, and Dr. Willem Zijp, a senior extension specialist in the same department, and who was asked to undertake the special responsibilities for evaluating the needs for agricultural extension in Russia. Other members of the mission included Dr. Lindsay Falvey from Australia, an animal scientist and a specialist in institutional organization. Also joining the mission was Dr. Ivan Buddenhagen, professor of agronomy and range science at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Buddenhagen was asked to take on the responsibility of evaluating agricultural research. Another member of the panel was Professor Denis I.F. Lucey, Dean of the Faculty of Commerce at the University College of Cork in Cork, Ireland, and for this mission, representing the Paris-based Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The final member of the mission was Dr. David MacKenzie, plant scientist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who was asked to evaluate the needs of higher education in Russia as it pertained to agricultural transformation. This World Bank mission was seen as very timely, given the expressed interest of the G7 Ministers of Finance, who, during their April 1993 meeting in Japan, pledged to assist Russia in making the transformation to a free market economy. This economic transformation would definitely need to include agriculture. The mission was scheduled to visit Russia during late September and early October 1993. These turned out to be very trying times because of Russian political instability surrounding the decision by Russian President Boris Yeltsin to dissolve parliament. At one point during the mission, a decision had to be made whether to continue, given the uncertainty of the political situation in Moscow following President Yeltsin's decision. This presidential action ultimately led to considerable physical violence in Moscow, but at no time did it threaten the safety of the bank mission members. The purpose of the World Bank mission visit was to study Russian higher education as research, teaching, and extension, and to provide documentation to the World Bank that could be used to evaluate where investments would best be made, and to make recommendations to both the Russian Ministry of Agriculture and the World Bank on how specific objectives could be accomplished. It was decided that the mission would first visit Moscow, meeting with representatives of the Ministry of Agriculture and with agricultural institutions located in the Moscow area. These initial visits helped to establish the expectations for not only the mission members, but also for the Ministry of Agriculture, and provided the mission with an understanding of how Russian agricultural research and education have operated during the past 7 decades. The panel then traveled overnight by train to the city of Voronezh. Voronezh is found southeast of Moscow and geographically located near the black soils of Russia. While in Voronezh, the mission had opportunity to visit institutions of higher education, research facilities, and agricultural production areas. The mission then traveled east by bus across the black soils to the city of Saratov, located in the Volga River. While in Saratov, the mission met with institutional leaders. Teaching faculty, research scientists, extension specialists, and private farmers to better understand their needs from the perspective of Russian higher education. The mission then traveled by plane from Saratov to Krasnodar. In Krasnodar, the mission experienced a completely different type of agriculture in the southern area just north of the Black Sea. Krasnodar's agriculture is represented by substantial crop diversity and a much warmer climate, allowing the culture of rice, maize, fruits, and many types of vegetables. The mission's expectations of Russian agriculture were for quality research activities based on their national reputation, combined with a classical education in agricultural science, given their academic traditions. The mission was not, in the beginning, fully appreciative of the financial problems that have beset higher education in Russia. These financial difficulties have greatly impacted the way in which institutional scientists are able to conduct their research and instruct their students. The mission members used some guiding principles to help judge the strengths of existing institutions, to serve as a foundation upon which recommendations could be made for a World Bank loan. Some of these guiding principles included the known benefits of linking teaching, research, and extension, the values of institutional pluralism, and the need for both theoretical and practical education in agriculture. Russia has not historically linked teaching, research, and extension in their institutional structures, which tend to be separated rather than integrated activities. Oftentimes, even in the same city, institutions with common missions remain separated administratively, even though the different institutions all receive orders and funding from Moscow. Institutional pluralism was surprisingly absent, and no doubt a consequence of the centrally planned economy emanating from Moscow. For instance, up until very recently, all curricula for higher education were prescribed for the entire nation with little instructional flexibility. Russia has done a good job of combining the theoretical with a practical education for the benefit of its students. This practice has no doubt evolved from the intent to place their graduates on large state farms and agricultural communes as graduates capable of undertaking management in specific areas of agricultural production. Russian agriculture is enormous, and it comes in many different forms. There are very large state farms that are said to be very inefficient because of their size, but they represent a major portion of the land area devoted to agriculture in Russia. There are agricultural communes that resemble state farms in terms of their scale, but many are now being converted to joint stockholder ownership as a form of privatization. A third form of Russian agriculture is the emerging private family farms, which now number 260,000 in the country averaging 42 hectares per farm. The fourth and final form of Russian agriculture are the weekend dacha farms, limited to 2/10 to 5/10 hectares and now numbering 35 million, and thus collectively represent an enormous amount of agricultural production in Russia. One of many surprising Russian attitudes observed by the mission members was towards individual ownership. During one of our excursions, the mission stopped and interviewed a farmer, asking questions such as, "Would you like to own land? And wouldn't you prefer to own this horse and wagon?" His reaction was quite negative, explaining that if he owned land or a horse, he would have to take on the responsibility and for no apparent benefit. He can borrow a horse and wagon from the commune and saw no need to own land. But privatization is coming to Russian agriculture in many forms. For instance, the issue of joint stock ownership for communal farms is starting to take hold. We visited a privatized commune in Krasnodar, and the mission members were quite impressed with how well the commune was operated, especially the good equipment that they had been able to purchase in Italy and the impressive improvements that they were experiencing in food production, processing, and marketing. As a consequence of the free market economy moving into agriculture, there are now emerging service industries to meet the needs of the private farmers. We saw one of these as a seed processing company, which was explained to one of the mission members.
Okay, Volodya, can you tell me how long you have been the owner, the co-owner of this grain storage plant?
Собственником элеватора мы являемся уже год. Это произошло в прошлом году, где-то в начале, наверное, августа месяца. Вот. С тех пор, значит, мы пока, конечно, дивиденды не получаем, но вкладываем. В принципе, все.
Volodya and Victor are amongst 21 owners who bought this old grain storage plant from the state. The state had operated this plant with a capacity of 30,000 tons of grain to the point where it didn't work anymore. It was in very bad repair, and farmers were not interested to bring their grains here. These two guys with 19 other people then bought for 1.5 million rubles this storage plant, and they're upgrading it now. Their efficiency is much higher. The farmers pay less for the storage of their grain. The farmers are, of course, interested in storing grain here because of the problems of selling grain. And if you have a bit more time to do so, it gives you a bit more leverage in your negotiations. They also have some added value because they clean and dry grain, something that the state never did. The state required you to bring already clean and dry grain to the storage. And these guys have the machinery and try their best to find machinery all over Russia to make their cleaning and drying equipment work for the farmers.
The mission also had a chance to visit a private farm to see how it is operated, to ask questions about the management, and to view the operation. These are very difficult times for the private farmers of Russia to find appropriate farm equipment, purchase supplies, and market their harvested products. One farmer explained the tax structure that limits profitability in private farming in Russia.
The breakdown of the former Soviet Union, this farmer had to pay for his machinery import duties of what used to be his own country. That is a tractor from the Ukraine that used to be part of his own country. Now he has to pay import taxes. This baler comes from Kazakhstan and he has to pay import duties. Thank goodness that manure spreader he has also bought, he doesn't have to pay because it happened to be built in Russia. All these taxes are nothing compared to the taxes that all these farmers have to pay. There are, according to the farmers we talked with, 56 different types of taxes they have to pay. On their net profit, they have to pay about 90% taxes. 30% of those are import taxes, federal taxes. 2% are taxes for the militia. 2% are in social taxes. 5% are transport tax. There is an income tax of 14%. There is a pension fund of 28%. There is an ecology tax of 1.5%. And so it does go on. That is all apart even from the value-added tax they have to pay and the sales tax on the produce they buy.
My name is Lina.
Lina, hi, my name is Willem. How do you do? Pleased to meet you. Do you milk the cow?
Yes.
How many liters? How many liters of milk?
8.
8 liters of milk?
Yes.
In a day? Uh-huh. Thank you very much, Lina. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Farmers are also having an impact on Russian agricultural production, as gardening is now becoming a common form of weekend recreation. Most dacha plots seem quite productive and well attended. For the most part, dacha farmers are ignored as not part of Russian agriculture, and they receive little services from the public sector. Given the emerging privatized agriculture in Russia and the interest of the G7 foreign ministers in stabilizing the Russian economy, the World Bank mission members focused on the area of curricular reform, agricultural research, and the extension services for the emerging new Russian agriculture. The G7 foreign ministers have pledged to accelerate programs of assistance to Russia in the amount of $43 billion over the next 12 to 15 months. The intention of this aid is to help develop the private sector, restructure state enterprises, strengthen the social safety net in Russia, and stabilize the economy, including agriculture. The Russian agro-industrial complex represents 25% of the net material product and 25% of the employment of Russia, and is built on an extensive natural resource base. In its previous form of centrally planned production, Russian agriculture absorbed a large share of the national budget. As inflation has exploded in Russia, consumers now allocate as much as 50% of their annual income to food purchases. Thus, the focused interest on economic reforms, which are coming, but quite slowly. In Russia, crop yields are said to be 20 to 30% below comparable levels elsewhere in the world, and livestock production is 40 to 50% below expectations. Moreover, there are large post-harvest losses estimated to be in excess of 60% of the harvest. This is said to be a consequence of the Soviet Union's focus on agricultural production rather than use. Higher education in the USSR also focused on production agriculture, and as a consequence, little academic instruction has been given to students in economics, agricultural business, or food processing and distribution. Moreover, the linkages between Russian teaching and research are minimal, mostly as a consequence of very high teaching loads for professors who have little time to conduct research and have provided little project support. Instead, research is primarily conducted at remote institutions for research separately organized by the Russian Academy of Agricultural Sciences. This division of activities in agriculture seems to work to the detriment of Russian needs. The panel also found that Russian research science tends to be quite isolated from the international scientific community, although what they do in research is often excellent. Russian scientific success is often in spite of limited access to literature, poor communication, and travel opportunities that are virtually non-existent in today's economic situation. For instance, at the time of the mission's visit to the Rice Research Institute in Krasnodar, the planned meager support for research had not been received from Moscow for 3 months. What is yet to be determined is what is the desirable size of the Russian agricultural research, teaching, and extension enterprise. There are indications that the number of scientists now in the system may be too large, given the expected resources and the future needs of Russian agriculture. The question then becomes, if indeed the system is too large, how should it be downsized? At present, the system is being reduced because salaries are extremely poor for scientists. For example, all assistant professors receive a salary determined in Moscow as 30,000 rubles per month, or approximately 28 US dollars. We visited a barley breeder at a research station in the central black soils who told us that her former department of 12 scientists is now reduced to 5, and that she could only afford to harvest her barley breeding program by growing a crop for cash, which was then used to hire casual labor to assist her with the threshing of the selected plants. Open markets for the private sale of agricultural products is a reality today in Russia. We visited a farmer's market in Voronezh to observe the activities, and Dr. Zijp had this to say.
And the whole building is owned by the Russian government, and individual producers, the farmers themselves, rent for a day a stall and sell their produce. Produce are somewhat set by the government, the prices are differentiated by quality, but there is a fair amount of negotiation we found. There are no long lines for people to buy produce. I'm standing here in front of a stall of 7 Azerbaijani farmers who came all the way from Azerbaijan to sell about 15,000 kilos worth of produce, including these pomegranates. They sell these things at home for about 200 rubles. Here they make about 1,000 rubles or $1 a piece for these pomegranates. A very clear example of the differences between state and private price setting. On my right there is the state dairy selling point. They sell feta cheese for 300 rubles a kilo. On my left here are the private farmers, and they sell their own made cheese for about 700 rubles. Obviously most consumers go there, but 2 hours from now, it's now early in the morning, but 2 hours from now the state will run out of supplies, and then these women will sell their cheese, and they assure me that by midday everything is gone.
Perhaps the biggest gap in Russian agricultural higher education is the absence or even an understanding of agricultural extension. Russia now provides centralized training and upgrading for instructors and training programs for farmers to certify them for farming privately. There is, however, no notion of providing services to individual farmers through an agricultural extension service, and in repeated discussions in Moscow and in institutions around the country, few could grasp the concept of a distributed, locally based advisory system for individual farmers. There are apparent real needs for agricultural higher education in Russia that have now been inventoried by the World Bank mission for closer consideration. Many of these items, such as salaries, the need for improved communication, the desirability of international travel, the need for revisions to curricula, and the desirability of a functioning extension service for Russian agriculture all depend on the availability of sufficient financial resources. Therein lies the role of the World Bank, to assist the Russian Ministry of Agriculture in strengthening higher education within the country and thus support the transformation of Russian agriculture.
Now is a problem to orient ourselves. What kind of specialists our country needs? What kind of specialists? You say nobody can answer you directly, that he knows what kind of specialists he must prepare, he must educate. It's a real problem for us. The problems of faculty. is a communication. It's a real problem. We say about the animal breeding, but we have no computers on our faculty. For example, one chair of an economical faculty have 50 computers, IBM computer, and on the faculty there are only one or two. We may say about selection, about animal breeding, but it's impossible without modern system of communication. It's moreover, we have no facts, we have no systems of computer net, we have no modems for connection with main libraries, and so on. Poor financing of academy, the problems in receiving of modern magazines, the informational problem, you see.
The most interesting trip that we had, we went to several institutions research, and we found that in spite of the very difficult situation, they continue to, some of them are still very devoted and they're working under enthusiasm. That enthusiasm impressed us most, but also we were concerned about the lack of incentive, low salary, and some poor equipment and facilities is hampering their work. I'm very convinced that it's extremely important for us to help them to sustain their research and education and to improve them so that it can help their agrarian reform.
The decay of intellectualism and scientific capacity is the most disturbing thing, but this is nicely counterpoised by the prevalence of wonderful range of human capital in the form of beautiful women. A lot of possibilities for good progress here if these people decide to pull their efforts together in a productive way, but I don't think they're going to find it too easy in the short run.
The region is offering opportunities for the bank. The project that we might come up with would involve supporting some of the research institutions and having them work a bit closer with the university. Some of the institutional problems relate to perhaps dictatorial styles of management and influence related back to Moscow, which we need to balance against encouraging some younger people in the system, and particularly retaining some of the PhD candidates who at the moment are wasting away because there are no opportunities for them. At the same time, the research infrastructure is declining and the human capital component of that is declining, so that we may be left without any research system in the future unless we do something. So perhaps there are two components, that of preserving something in the short term and building up something for the longer term.
Well, there's a lot of research being done, but it's kind of abstract and separated from reality. But there's some very good work being done at the Rice Research Institute, and the phytopath insect biocontrol place we saw this morning in Krasnodar was really interesting.
What really interested me here in Krasnodar were two things. One is the integration between the university, the research institutes, and the Department of Agriculture. They seem to work closer together than anywhere else I've seen it. And secondly, their focus on farmers. They have a farmer faculty at the university, and they have a retraining institute for staff, but they also cater for farmers for short courses.
The urgency of the World Bank's mission was punctuated on its return to Moscow with the outcome of the political turmoil, finally resolved by President Yeltsin through the use of force on the Russian parliament. Russia is unstable, and this is not in the world's best interest. The desirability of a stable government in Russia calls for assistance in a timely manner. Many of the frustrations voiced to the mission over the present political difficulties in Russia relate to the economic tension and the uncertainties of transforming the Russian economy to a free market system. Agriculture will be central to that transformation, and thus the need to help Russian public institutions to bring about these needed changes.
Thank you.